Meanwhile, across the city, Jungkook stepped into a dimly lit alley, pulling his jacket tighter around him as the cool wind brushed against his skin. His heart was racing, though his face remained calm. He had just left Taehyung's penthouse, but already he was back in the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness ahead of him. "You met with him?" the voice asked, low and gravelly. Jungkook nodded. "Yes," and Jungkook hesitated, his mind flashing back to Taehyung's intense gaze, the way his walls had briefly crumpled last night. "He's starting to suspect something." The figure stepped closer, and under the faint light, a smirk appeared on his lips. "Good. Keep him distracted. We need him vulnerable when we make our move." Jungkook's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. This had been the plan all along, hadn't it? Get close to Taehyung, learn his weaknesses, and betray him when the time was right. But why did it feel so wrong now? The figure chuckled, sensing Jungkook's hesitation. "Don't forget, Jungkook. You have a role to play in all of this. Don't let your feelings get in the way." Jungkook swallowed hard, nodding silently. He had come too far to back out now. Yet, as he turned and walked away from the alley, a sinking feeling settled in his chest. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep playing both sides. Jungkook walked in silence, the noise of the city fading into the background as his thoughts took over. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the secrets he carried. His role as a double agent had been clear from the beginning: get close to Taehyung, uncover his operations, and eventually take him down from the inside. But no one had warned him about the emotional minefield that would come with it. Taehyung was not the monster everyone painted him to be. Yes, he was powerful, ruthless even, but there was something more beneath the surface. Something that tugged at Jungkook's conscience every time he thought about what he was about to do. And last night had shattered the careful distance Jungkook had tried to maintain between them. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. A message from the same figure who had met him in the alley. "Next meeting is in 48 hours. Don't get too comfortable." Jungkook stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt like he was standing on a cliff's edge, torn between loyalty to his mission and the growing pull he felt toward Taehyung. He couldn't afford to fall any deeper. Back in his penthouse, Taehyung leaned against the large window, staring out at the city lights that flickered below. His thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, confusion, and something he refused to name. It had been hours since Jungkook had left, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the younger man than he knew. That message on his phone earlier, "He's not who you think he is," still haunted him. Taehyung didn't trust easily, but when he did, loyalty was everything. If Jungkook was playing a game, he would find out. And he wouldn't forgive. A knock on the door broke his reverie. "Come in," Taehyung said, turning just as Jisoo entered the room, a thick file in her hand. Her face was expressionless, but Taehyung knew her well enough to see the tension in her eyes. "I've got the information you asked for," Jisoo said quietly, placing the file on his desk. Taehyung's gaze narrowed as he walked over, flipping open the file. Inside were details of Jungkook's past, background checks, surveillance photos, every trace of his life that Jisoo's team had been able to uncover. Taehyung's eyes scanned the pages quickly, looking for anything that could explain the nagging suspicion that had taken root in his mind. But something was wrong. The details were too clean, too perfect. Jungkook's records showed an ordinary life, no significant criminal history, no ties to rival gangs, nothing that raised alarms. It was as if Jungkook had lived in the shadows without leaving a trace behind. This can't be right, Taehyung muttered, frustration lacing his words. He slammed the file shut, his instincts screaming that something was missing. Jizza hesitated before speaking again. There's more, Taehyung. I didn't want to bring it up until I had confirmation, but there's been chatter about someone infiltrating her ranks. Someone close. I think Jungkook might be connected to it. Taehyung's heart clenched, a flash of anger surging through him. He had known this life was filled with betrayal, but the thought of Jungkook, his Jungkook, being part of a plot against him was almost unbearable. If he's betraying me, I'll kill him, Taehyung said darkly, his voice a low growl. Jiju didn't flinch. I'll keep digging, but we need to be careful. If he's playing us, we can't let him know we're onto him, Taehyung nodded, though his mind was already racing ahead. He would deal with this in his own way, in his own time. If Jungkook thought he could deceive him, he was gravely mistaken. But Taehyung wasn't ready to let go just yet. Not until he knew the truth. Don't act on anything yet, Taehyung instructed. I want to see how this plays out. Jiju gave a small nod before excusing herself, leaving Taehyung alone once again with his thoughts. He stared at the closed file for a long time, his emotions a storm beneath the surface. The rational part of him screamed that Jungkook was a threat, that he needed to be eliminated before things went too far. But the other part, the part that he had felt something real between them, wasn't so sure. The next evening, Taehyung arranged to meet Jungkook at one of his private clubs. He needed to keep his enemies close, and right now, no one was closer than Jungkook. He watched from a dimly lit booth as Jungkook entered the club, his presence commanding attention even though he walked in with quiet confidence. Jungkook's eyes found Taehyung's almost immediately, and he made his way over, slipping into the seat opposite him. For a moment, neither spoke, the tension between them thick and suffocating. You called for me, Jungkook said finally, his tone neutral, though his eyes never left Taehyung's. I did, Taehyung replied coolly, taking a slow sip of his drink. I wanted to see you. Jungkook raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his seat, though his body was coiled tight, as if ready for whatever came next. And what exactly did you want to see? Taehyung smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. I've been thinking a lot about you, Jungkook. About last night. About who you really are. Jungkook's breath hitched slightly, though he quickly masked it with a smirk. And who do you think I'm? Taehyung leaned forward, his gaze piercing. That's the problem. I don't know. But I will. The air between them crackled with tension, each word laced with underlying threats and promises. Jungkook's smirk faltered for a split second, and Taehyung caught it. It was all the confirmation he needed that something was off. Before Taehyung could press further, his phone buzzed, and he glanced down at it briefly. Another message from the anonymous source. You're running out of time. He's not who he says he is. Taehyung's jaw clenched, the lines between loyalty and lies blurring further with each passing second. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his eyes never leaving Jungkook's. He wasn't sure whether he would destroy Jungkook or fall deeper into the web they were both caught in. But one thing was certain, this game was far from over. Taehyung's gaze lingered on Jungkook, the weight of suspicion and desire hanging thick in the air between them. Every second felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode. He had never hesitated before when dealing with potential traitors. He had dealt with them swiftly, without mercy. But Jungkook was different, and Taehyung hated that. Hated the way the younger man stirred feelings he had long buried beneath layers of ruthlessness. Taehyung. Jungkook's voice was soft, breaking the silence between them. His eyes flickered with something unreadable. Fear? Guilt? You're overthinking this. Taehyung's hand tightened around the glass he held. Am I? His voice was low, dangerous. He leaned in closer, his eyes locked onto Jungkook's. Then tell me, who are you really? Jungkook held his gaze, but Taehyung could see the cracks starting to form in his calm exterior. He waited for a response, his patience wearing thin. But Jungkook stayed silent, choosing his next words carefully, as if one wrong move would send everything crumbling. You already know who I am, Jungkook finally said, his voice steady but not without tension. I've never lied to you, Taehyung. The words hung between them like a lie in itself. Taehyung's instincts told him not to trust, that Jungkook was hiding something, perhaps everything. But for reasons he couldn't fully understand, he still wanted to believe him. He had seen something real in Jungkook last night, something beyond the facade. Before Taehyung could push further, the doors to the private club opened, and Namjoon entered, his expression grim. He approached their booth without a word, handing Taehyung a folded note. Taehyung's heart sank as he unfolded it, his eyes scanning the hastily scribbled words. They're coming. The message was simple, but its implications were clear. Rival forces were making their move, and soon. Taehyung's mind raced as he realized the danger was closer than he thought. His enemies weren't just closing in on his territory, they were closing in on him. He looked up at Namjoon, who gave a subtle nod. The South District. They're preparing an ambush. Taehyung's hand flexed over the note, crumpling it in his fist. His thoughts shifted from Jungkook's potential betrayal to the immediate threat. Ready the men. I want everyone on high alert. Namjoon nodded again and left as quickly as he had come. Taehyung turned his attention back to Jungkook, the tension between them now charged with more than just suspicion. I need you to stay here, Taehyung said, his voice firm, but there was something deeper in his tone, something protective. Jungkook's eyes flashed with defiance. You can't keep me locked up, Taehyung. I'm not some pawn in your game. I don't know what you are yet, Taehyung shot back, his anger bubbling to the surface. But until I do, you're not leaving my sight. Jungkook stood, his fists clenched. You can't protect me forever. Taehyung rose as well, stepping closer until they were face to face, his presence commanding, intense. I can, and I will. Whether you want me to or not. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, emotions neither was willing to admit. Taehyung didn't know if it was rage, desire, or something in between that surged through him, but before he could stop himself, his hand reached out, pulling Jungkook close by the collar of his shirt. The kiss was sudden, rough, and desperate. Taehyung poured everything he felt into it, his anger, his confusion, his need. And Jungkook, to his surprise, didn't pull away. Instead, he hit back with equal intensity, his fingers tangling in Taehyung's hair, pulling him deeper. For that brief moment, the outside world didn't exist. There was no mafia war, no secrets, no betrayal, only them. But as they pulled apart, reality came crashing back in. Taehyung's breath was heavy, his forehead pressed against Jungkook's, his emotions still swirling chaotically inside him. I'm not letting you out of my sight, Taehyung whispered, his voice raw. Not until I know the truth. Jungkook's eyes were filled with something Taehyung couldn't place, something that made him want to believe that whatever game Jungkook was playing, it wasn't against him.